So here I am live so that we can get into the final segment. Well, not the final segment. The final segment at this time. After 5 days of doing this 9 to 3, and then multiple hours before, but fast as they say in Danish, not with the speed, but meaning steadily, steadily. So this is also kind of irritating. Okay. Yes. So the Entrepreneur Hotline. What's it about? It is a labor of love. It is a platform that has been created 24/7 around the clock entrepreneurship for the benefit of the entrepreneur throughout Entrepreneurship Week, Global Entrepreneurship Week, which is ending today. It, there are lots of activities that are going to continue to go on, but the largest part of the program has been Monday through Thursday, Friday. So we are going until 6 o'clock tonight. We've been 24/7 up to this point, and it is myself, Gail, Gillian, Colin Scotland, who are the three official hosts. We have had many guests, 16, I think we have 16, 18, something like 16 to 18 uh, guest speakers who are coming on, and we have had a range of topics that we've discussed. The core of the discussion has been surrounded by, or every speaker has mentioned, the importance of mindset and the importance of entrepreneurial well being. So that is also in keeping with why we do this, and that is for your entrepreneurial well being, that you do not feel isolated, that you are not stressed out by, or if you are stressed out by not having information or not feeling like you fit in or feeling isolated in terms of your social status with others who have perhaps day jobs, regular 9 to 5 jobs, and don't really get why you're spending all this time doing this thing that they don't quite understand, or that you've done it much longer than they thought was reasonable, or whatever. We are here, we understand, and we have many perspectives to share with you and to illuminate for you how entrepreneurial spirit looks like in real life and in real time. So, to that end, I will continue with this innovation theme I've been going with earlier today. And I am going to do a presentation, a repurposed presentation on the untapped potential, which will touch upon the Edward de Bono Six Thinking Hats as a methodology for being innovative and creative and working with your team. So I will share my screen and get into it. Here it is. Hopefully it will look fine. I'm here. Oh, really? How about that? Yes. I think you're looking at the presentation. Yes, it looks to be. So, yes, untapped potential. I'm going to have to look at the actual presentation because I won't be able to see. So, here we go. Untapped potential, why diversity is the answer to innovation solutions. Lori Webb. It's a collaboration, actually, but with my sister, with the Institute of Executive Leadership. We collaborated on doing this. I am showing it to you here as a presentation model. And I am going to take myself out of the picture now, so you don't have to watch me reading. Untapped potential, why diversity is the answer to innovation solutions. Who am I? Well, I am Lori Webb. I am from a company, my own, called Inspok, which is a Danish word meaning in everyday usage to inspire, to inform, to motivate, and to kick in the butt as necessary. And that is exactly what I do through writing, speaking, creating events, creating experiences, and doing things such as the Entrepreneurial Hotline. This is much like my social media canvas presentation earlier that I shared yesterday. This is the blank slate that is the blank canvas to give you a sense of all the opportunity that is out there for innovation as well. And that's why it's here. And it is however you see that canvas evolving and looking for you. So it looks different for everyone, but it is endless possibilities. That is one of the very first key pivotal things to know about creating your innovation awareness. That everything is possible. That if you go to it with an open mind, then you will see things that you would not have seen if you thought that the opportunities weren't there. Uh, Much like fencing in your brain, you're fencing in your creativity. So you want to open that fence and you want to let your mind be free and to create other opportunities. It's in your DNA, it's in everyone's DNA to be creative, to be innovative. So you must acknowledge that and embrace it. And when you're working with others, also, you must respect that it is the same for them, even though the ideas will be very different, the approaches will be very different, and the results will be very different. Forget about walking in my shoes. Just try to last 5 minutes in my head. That's unknown. That could have been me, though. I love this idea that we are filled with ideas, notes, things that we would create, but often it gets stuck in our head, and we are trapped. Well, analysis paralysis, it's called, among other things, but that's one of the best ways to describe it. Overwhelm as well. The divine light in me greets the divine light in you. So having a mutual respect, tapping into your inner mind to leverage the avenue, the vehicle for getting into a deeper sense of meaning for yourself and to reach clarity and to be able to use that in your outer world, so to speak. Diversity is the art of thinking together individually, Malcolm Forbes. And that's a really important piece of the puzzle, no pun intended. It is critical when thinking about being innovative that there are a few things that must occur. You must have creativity present, you must have diversity present, and you must have the entrepreneurial spirit present. Now, you must have creativity present, to think of things, to think of new ways to do different things, to think of new, complete different things. You can't get different if you are surrounded by same. Something has to be changed. That's where diversity comes in. If you are a homogenous group and everybody comes from the same place, has the same background, similar backgrounds, everything is the same, you will be like fish in a fishbowl, and it will be hard for you to realize things such as you need water to breathe because you're a fish, and that if you leave the water, you will die because you won't be able to breathe. Now, this is critical in understanding that something has to change, something has to be different, something has to happen. An experience can be the change, it can add the diversity. One of the fish gets sick and starts to experience things in a different way, which adds to the diverse thinking. It could be that two of the fish come together and create a new fish, and that experience changes the way they think. It changes their circumstances, it changes their social standing, it changes their responsibility, it changes the context, right? Um, one of the fish dies. It changes the group dynamic, it changes the emotional feelings. So that's taking a group of fish in a fishbowl, the same fish basically, doing the same thing, to describe innovation in a homogeneous yet diverse situation. Now, this actual slide has different colors on it to represent different pieces of the puzzle. And much like using colors, you have more options, you have more possibilities by having more colors because you can create more nuances, which means that you have more diversity. And that is critical for thinking about, it gives you more options simply. So you want diversity. So while yes, it's nice if you bring a woman into the boardroom when there's only men, it would be more eye-opening if the boardrooms looked a little bit more like this picture, that there was gender identification represented in all forms. If there were handicapable people represented in various incarna- in incarnations of that. If you had um, various minorities represented, if you had various people with various sexual orientation represented, if you have people of different cultural backgrounds represented, different ethnic groups represented, different religious groups represented, different sizes, different, weight, height, all those things represented. Now, it's not possible for every board to be that diverse. But the reason that I mention them specifically, because the idea of diversity for so many is binary. It basically is, and please do not be offended, but it is what it is. And often it goes from a group of fairly homogenous group of middle-aged white men on the board to adding perhaps a white woman on the board. That is so incrementally diverse that it doesn't up your innovation game, quite frankly. So I'm not casting, this isn't a discussion on innovation and inclusion. This isn't a presentation about that, but it is so powerful to think of the limitations that you put upon yourself when you don't add more voices to the conversation. If you think of it, I mean, if you do the math on it, if you take different numbers and then you multiply them, you get larger numbers, that's larger options. And not all, you don't always need a lot of options. You don't want really a lot of options. It can be crowded and cluttered. you want the best options, but sometimes it takes number it's a number sometimes it can be a numbers game to get to the best uh, solution. So in that respect, it's a good thing. Also because of the fact that having those people in the room, having more people in the room can save you time, energy, and money in the long term because you are addressing because then what is mirrored in the room is mirrored in the society, is a mirror of your actual customers. It is a mirror of your actual patients. It's a microcosm of what of whom you're trying to reach. And that means less of a struggle with user testing and those kind of things because if someone is in the room who has the experience, I like to use an example of if you are able bodied and you walk through the city, your experience is very different if you, for example, are not able bodied. And in this example, it could be you're unable to walk gainfully. It's difficult for you, and that could be an age related thing. That could be a birth uh, something you've had since birth. It could be something that occurred for you, and your perspective will change if you're in the situation. If you had involved, people involved in the infrastructure building uh, committee, city planning committee who were in that situation, then one would not be putting accessibility on like a patch. I have personal experience with this because I was in an accident at 19 and hit by a car and suddenly was not able to walk, and many other things, story for another time. But when I relearned to walk, when I got out of the hospital, I had a half body cast, which also impeded a lot of my experience in the real world or the outside world. It also meant that I couldn't get around in the same way. It caused problems in ways that I had never thought to address. And those things, like small things like even being able to go to the bathroom, the bathroom that we had in my mother's house at the time, my mother's apartment at the time, the way that the toilet and the sink and the bathtub were set up, there was barely space for me to maneuver with a half body cast. So that made, getting into the bathroom and out of the bathroom very difficult. Uh, Having to travel by wheelchair or by crutches for a period of time, not a long period, but it was enough to give me a taste and something that would stick with me for my life in terms of how difficult it is to navigate city streets or public transportation and those kinds of things. So that point to drive home that if you have someone who has the experience, then they can inform you and they can think of things before you have to fix them, so to speak. You can integrate it so that it is easier, it's more equitable for everyone. If it's someone who has, it brings up their issues in a way that can contribute to everyone. So it isn't you're not doing anybody a favor by adding them to the diversity mix. It is about inclusive thinking, and the diversity adds to that point, but it also adds to your bottom line because it helps you to be more innovative. And that's what we're talking about today. So let's talk about that innovative mind. To expand your thinking, you want to integrate both the left side and the right side of your brain. It gives you a chance to be practical. Good design, for example, is not just aesthetically pleasing, it is not just functional. It needs to be both. It has to be also equitable. It has to be able to, in a context of the entrepreneurial world, we talked about this yesterday a little bit with design thinking, it needs to also be viable. So it needs to be something somebody wants, it needs to be desirable, it needs to be something you can deliver on, it needs to be feasible, and it needs to be something that can be sustained, which means it needs to have a return. It needs to, the return has to be more than the cost. So those three elements, right brain, left brain thinking, the processes, the creative ability, all of this, the language, the communication with the systems and the organization and the practicalities, that has to come together, uh, so that you can expand your thinking and expand your approaches. If you expand your sense of self, you will expand the possibilities of what you manifest simply. You, your team. Limits are what happens in your mind. Other people will perhaps try to set limits on you, but ultimately it's up to you to accept or not accept those limits. And we are speaking in a context of within reason, of course, within reason. But that is the essence of it. It's up to you. It's your sense of mind, self, uh, your perception of what is out there. It is basically the self fulfilling prophecy. Expand who you hang out with. That's to that diversity piece. Expand who you hang out with. Expand the meetings you go to, the fairs you go to. Expand the books you read. Expand the food you eat. Expand your opportunities. It will enrich your life, quite frankly, I believe. Expand where you travel to. If you are unable to travel longer distances or you don't want to travel longer distances for environmental reasons, there's plenty to do in your backyard, basically, to connect with others that would still help to expand your experience. Young, old, different places of work, types of work, all that stuff. Expansion leads to expanded outlooks and outlooks that will lead to innovation. Apropos, you want an innovative team? These are some of the things that you want to have on your team. Two heads are better than one, they say. You have a diversity leadership challenge. Now, here is a very, very prevalent conundrum that, especially in large organizations, there is something that people hear about. We need diversity, we need innovation. These are words. We need more entrepreneurial thinking. And the people who are leading the charge do not either embrace it, understand it, or endorse it. And so you have basically a scenario of a blindfolded person leading a group of blindfolded people. So this is an indication of a lot of the problems that one has. If you look at your team, if you look at who does what and how things are done, most innovation does not come from the top down. It comes from the bottom up. It is, as I mentioned earlier, with social media, why you want to empower and give agency to the bees, the worker bees, because that's who makes the honey. And they're the ones who are out in the field. They live a more separate life, in terms of, they are probably more closely connected to your customer. Now, this is also, I have to be careful about saying that because it depends on your culture, it depends on where you live. For example, it's a flatter organization. the organizations in Denmark are flatter, so you don't have this extreme gap between leadership, executives, versus staff, or people who are working, uh, hospital administration, and employees, or doctors and nurses, and the rest of the staff. Education, same way. It's a flatter organization, so it's not as broad. But that being said, you still want everyone to have a chance to give their input and let them be allowed to actually work in their zone of genius. If that is the case, that they are thinking out of the box, to use the expression that everybody wants to use, um, then that would be smarter to let them run with a project than to just have someone who has a title, who might not, who might be nervous about being vulnerable because they don't understand. They might have some really good ideas, but they're challenged because they're not as tech savvy, and tech savviness is a demand in creating what they're trying to create, or they're missing a piece, and that could be a blockage. Instead of saying, okay, if you also lead with openness, then people will know where your strengths and your weaknesses are, and you'll be able to work further through. You'll be able to work through those challenges faster and get further. You do have to be cautious when navigating the environment, because it can look like this with the innovation. There's a whole lot of, this is great, and follow me, and this is what's going to happen, and intentions can be misleading, and the innovative train might be leading you down the wrong track. So you also need to you innovation for innovation's sake can be positive in the process, but if you're wasting resources, and if what you're aiming to innovate, if you're being specific about what you're trying to innovate on, and it has no relevance or alignment to your company, then you got to be careful when you're going that direction. And to navigate that environment is critical, so that you understand what you're working with. And that's why um, uh, ethnography, I think it's called ethnography. It's from culture theory, and um, studying other cultures. You want to be a part of it so that you can be a little bit of fly on the wall to see how people are doing things in another culture. And in this case, I'm not discussing uh, national culture. I'm thinking of, it could be corporate culture, it could be any kind of culture, social cultures. This is more to be a part, being a fly on the wall, but yet being a part, like assimilated to a certain extent, to help you understand. Otherwise, you won't have a context, and you'll be outward looking in and misinterpreting. That's where the danger is. So you need to be able to connect the key with the keyhole to get the answers, and to be able to get to your solution. What is the key? And I mean, the keyhole is the problem, it's the question, and the key is the answer or the solution. Now, making that perfect match is connecting people, like I said, with the right, who have right brain thinking, and people who have left brain thinking. For far too long, there was an emphasis and a certain element of elevation, or power, weight, pondus to left brain thinking. However, now we are moving more into empathy and collective approaches, and using that right brain thinking. And I mentioned yesterday the masculine, through based on Gert Hofstede's cultural his paradigm for culture being the masculine and the feminine, whereas the masculine is the more traditional that we experience from that time. It would have been binary. It would have been male, female, and they are more adhering to roles, specific roles within those binary confines, whereas feminine has been about not that the gender doesn't matter, that women can be whatever women want to be and men can be whatever men want to be. If that means traditionally doing something that the other gender had done, that doesn't matter. And societies around the world have different uh, tolerances and acceptance of those aspects and the placing of roles, but you want to be able to have both for your innovative power toolbox. You also want different solutions for different problems. So the key doesn't always, uh, yeah, you have to have several keys actually. One key does not fit all locks. And that's why you also want to have people who think differently, because then you can approach the problems from different angles, and different employees, different parts of your team can be, or different parts of your social circle could be the keys to help unlock your 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 issue. So innovation context, the tree, and the tree is the internal context. So when you're creating your innovative team, you want to build the tree. You want to seed the idea. This is also for education with children. We could even take it to that level. You want to seed the possibilities. You want to empower. You want to have open, not limited mindsets. You want to cultivate that. And the tree is interesting for so many reasons, but because the tree has a network of roots, and the roots speak to each other. They communicate to each other underground. And sowing a environment, seeding an environment for innovative thinking will create a communication system within the organization that can feed and help develop new trees, and to help you in that system to have a team, an internal way of working that is sustainable, so that you're not just thinking, okay, now we need to be innovative. You just will be innovative because you've nurtured that. You've seeded it, you've nurtured it, it's grown. And as a startup, as an entrepreneur, the time is the beginning to start doing that, so that it can be integrated and grown into the culture organically and naturally. The bee, as an example. You also want to have bees on your team. You can be that bee, and the bee goes out and spreads the innovation. It spreads the the mindset. It spreads the innovation, and it cross pollinates. So it picks up and spreads, so that you're able to be forward facing, outward facing with your innovation. Innovation takes place internally. How can you innovate your systems? How can you innovate your staff approaches? How can you innovate your office? How can you innovate all of the things that are inside of your business? There are processes that you can be more efficient in. It can be greening your business. It can be supporting lifestyle choices for the people that you work with or your team. It can be so many things that you focus on within that realm, but you can also be focusing on how do you innovate to impact what's outside. And those things can be creating products for a consumer market. Those things can be creating opportunities and platforms for a group to do things in a different way, kind of like this. Um, it is you producing something or enabling something or sharing something that you do to the outer world. Then you have the C, which is the integration of the two. The tree, I use the tree as an example, I use the B as an example, and now I'm using the C as an example. Get it? A tree, A B, A C. Yes, a little bit of word nerdage there. It's integrated because the sand and the water, the sand and the sea integrate, right? The sand and the sea are always, there's an ebb and flow of the sea, and it's always bringing the sand in and it's always integrating with the sand. It's bringing the sand in, it's bringing the sand out. And an integrated model leverages both your internal innovations with your external innovations. And that's the sweet spot, to be able to be known for actually being innovative, for being known for being innovative, and to work in synergy to innovate even further. So how do we get to the core of this? How do we start with attempting to innovate? There's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of methodologies that you can check in, but one of the oldest is Edward de Bono, who created the six thinking hats, and leveraging both left and right brain. We also know 1 + 1 = 3 in terms of mastermind approach, that my thinking and your thinking together leads to an extended ability to think. It creates another entity because it's you, me, and we. That's the third. And then we have the story of the 6 and the 9, which is about perspective. This is Edward de Bono thinking. 6 and 9. And the reason why the 6 and 9 is important, because people often argue about argue due to miscommunication, largely, and largely because people are arguing out of their perspective without being open or understanding the perspective of the other person. So if I'm standing at the bottom of the 6 and looking up, I'm going to see a 6. If I'm standing at the top of the 6, I'm going and looking down, I'm going to see a 9. So you and I could be standing across from each other with a 6 or a 9, depending on your perspective on, and be arguing about it's a 6, it's a 9, it's a 6, it's a 9. And that is why parallel thinking is such an important aspect to Edward de Bono's why Edward de Bono came up with parallel thinking, so that we can be at the same place at the same time and be able to approach things from similar perspective, and then acknowledge the good, the bad, the ugly at the same time. So we're having synchronic discussions. So while I'm arguing about, that's where this comes from, argumentation, that most people are having an adversary approach to discussion. So you're in the boardroom, and for whatever reason, Sam doesn't really get along with Jim, and so it doesn't matter what Jim says. Jim might have the next best thing, and Sam knows it, but he's going to block it because he just doesn't like him, and he just doesn't want him to get credit for coming up with the great idea. And then the idea dies because he is in a position to knock it down. Now, we arguably use most of our time using this critical thinking, in the vein of let's just be realistic. I spoke about realistic and my feeling about the word often, that it's often used as a manipulator. And um, when it's not being used as a manipulator, like a soft manipulator, that's when people use it and don't realize that they're manipulating, that they're using it to limit what you attempt to do by saying, well, I think you should be realistic. However, most people use it because they think they're helping you. They think that they're pointing out to you that you're not being reasonable. They're pointing out to you that there's danger. You're stepping out of the box. You're stepping out of the status quo. You're stepping out of the visible field, and we are worried on your behalf that it could be dangerous outside of that field. So there is my feeling about the word reality. So to to go back to this idea of parallel thinking and being away, the lateral thinking as well, to things are not happening in a straight line, that it's easier to understand things in the rear view mirror, as they say, that what happens, it doesn't always make sense when you look at your life. Anybody who's lived for a particular amount of time, a reasonably long amount of time to be able to reflect, you you would not have foreseen that you would end up, most people, I don't know of anyone actually who could predict that they would be where they were 20 years, 30 years, 50 years down the line. There's so many twists and turns. You can you could want to be you can want to achieve something and you can work to get there. That's different. But how you get there is often not the plan. There's not the plan as the plan. It would be the plan with many hiccups and many twists and turns. So let's talk six thinking hats. And this is Edward de Bono and the six thinking hats, which represent, I this is the order that they're up, but we're going to work from the bottom down. The bottom right, the white hat. The white hat is the information hat. And so when I've been certified through the six thinking hats, well, actually focus on facilitation, so lateral thinking and parallel thinking, and specifically use of the six thinking hats as one model. And what I liked about I've tried many other ones. I've been certified in other methodologies, but the reason I like six thinking hats still, with a little bit of tweaks here and there, is that it's very, very clear and concise. It's when used correctly, which is to say parallelly, in parallel. That means when you're having a group and you're using six thinking hats, you use the hats all at the same time. Some people get together and they try to use the hats separately, and that defeats the whole purpose of the hats. I mean, it's to get to the best idea, then it allows for people to evaluate using each hat as a framework. So it helps you to identify the positives, the negatives, the opportunities. It allows you to evaluate the temperature of the room. How do people feel about the idea, which gives you a sense of why they would be expressing themselves in the way that they're expressing themselves. And all people get heard. So if you are quiet or you're a little bit laid back, your ideas are not drowned out or are not eliminated because there was no time to bring them to the table, or that they were not able to really be heard, or if you have communication challenges or anything. Everyone is a part of this. So the white hat is the information hat. It is what we know and what we need to know. Basically, it's about the facts, it's looking at it neutrally. Here's the information. Now, the black hat is the hat that most people use. That's the critical hat. And in this case, however, it's not to be a negative, it's just critical. It is just evaluating things, looking at them and saying, how could things be better? Let's look at where we could have vulnerability points. This is just to raise, this is where you're looking at where flags could be raised in future, and that can be very helpful, but the way that it gets used often in reality is that it's more a negative. It's the way the brain works basically on default, so it's hard to combat it and be conscious of it, but most people are looking for the thing that's wrong and focusing on what's wrong rather than what's right. And you can listen to Dr. Chris, um, the interview that Colin did with Dr. Chris earlier in the Entrepreneur Hotline Summit. Now let's go to the blue hat, which is actually the core hat in terms of facilitation. So when I'm going out to facilitate Six Thinking Hats, the blue hat is my hat. That's the hat I always am working from. I can switch out hats sometimes, but that's the blue hat is the facilitator hat. It's the hat of having the meta vision. It is the bird's eye view. It is looking to evaluate what's happening in the room, when one hat needs to be used versus another hat, to keep people in check in terms of ensuring that they remain in the correct hat, to not confuse the output. And so that is, it's thinking about the thinking. The hat is thinking about the thinking. And one is always, while in the process of using the six thinking hats and creating a plan for which hat gets used when, that's what the facilitator does in tangent with the client, with the person who's hiring them, uh, the person who needs their assistance. And they would go in and discuss the white hat, would discuss the, get a feel of the atmosphere and the people who are going to be in the room and the nature of the problem, and then would evaluate a system of a plan for the facilitation. Then everyone comes into the room and is made aware of how to go about this. There are the tools that get used. There's a timer, and there are a lot of post-it notes, and there are some key strategy. There's some key prompts that are used to get people to open up their minds and be able to note how they're thinking, using each hat. And that brings us to the yellow hat. Now, the yellow hat is the possibility hat. That's if everything is shiny and rosy, that's the hat that you use, like the sun. And going up on that side is the green hat, which is the growth hat. It is the hat of possibilities. It is the turnaround hat. How do you, when confronted with the black hat, the critical hat, how do we take these problems and turn it around? But it's also, how do we create something new? How do we develop something out of nothing? The red hat is also the hat that is more often used on the regular, and it is your emotion hat, your gut feeling. It is the hat that actually in Six Thinking Hats is used the least. It has the shortest, it is given the shortest amount of attention. So whereas you might have 3 minutes to think of why your idea is, what are the best things about this idea I just put on the table? And you have 3 minutes to write down as many reasons why it's a good idea on individual post-it notes, and then we'll take all of those notes and put them up on the board now, or actually you'll keep them and then we'll put the best ones on the board after we finish the session. So you will take the red hat, and as opposed to the 3 minutes, you'll do maybe 30 seconds. You'll just go around like, so what do you think? Just how do you think the process is going? Do you like the idea? And people just tap in, yes, no. Or it really, it avoids that we've tried it before feeling the whole process of the six thinking hats. We've done it before, it doesn't work, and then the conversation is shut down. It gives people a chance to open their frame of reference by being put in a position to spend a limited amount of time thinking of all of the good things, and then also thinking of all of the risk and the negative things that could happen, or the challenges that would happen by putting on the black hat. And then you could go over to the green hat and think of the ways that those critical elements, you will see, is it possible to turn that around, those some of the things that we're afraid of, like if you're saying we tried it before, it didn't work, then the green hat thinking can be around what was the context of that, what, who was in the room, like was it the group, was it the timing, was it the technology, what was it that made it not work in that particular instance? Just because something didn't work in 2015 doesn't mean it won't work in 2019, right? And then the red hat I told you about. So I'm dancing around this a lot. I would love for you to look into this further. I'd love for you to take a few minutes doing it. It's so much fun. There are lots of real good output that comes from doing the six thinking hats, because as I said, it gives visibility, it gives a voice to everyone who's in the room, and it provides a, a container for the information. The container for the information means that all of these post-it notes that are being produced, all of these ideas that are being produced when I've been out facilitating, then it is organized in the end. The all of the post-it notes are categorized, and then they're put into an envelope that you have. So if you want to revisit it, like I said, an idea that doesn't work in 2015 may work in 2019. You but if you Yeah, maybe your chances are you're not going to be holding on to it for 4 years. But the point being that an idea that doesn't work right now might work in a few months, and it's because of the extra abilities that you have on your team. You might not have had that missing link. It might be because you are in a better situation financially to implement the idea. It could be that technology has caught up to where had you had an idea that extended beyond where technology was at this particular state. So timing is really key, and to have all of these ideas gathered and to be able to go back to them and pull them up, because often it's, we do a matrix at the end. So, let's pick out the best ideas based on the criteria that we have been around, basically done a 360 about the possibilities, about the information that we have and what we needed, and gathering that, comparing it to the pluses and the minuses and the possibilities, and what's the temperature of the room, how do people feel about it. You have a lot of passionate people, or people are really not feeling it, and you can evaluate all of that by using this methodology, and then deciding to take the best ideas, the ideas that have consensus, and then deciding, what's easy to implement, what can we implement right now, what's easy and cheap, let's say, and what is difficult but will give a better return on investment, right? And then you can evaluate where you're at and go for that. But say, as an example, typically, if it's expensive and if it's difficult, then chances are that's not something that it's better to go for things that are easy and less expensive, to less of a risk to take. But if you're going big or going home, you might say, we're going to go for that. In other cases, you'll say, we love this idea. This is not the time for us for whatever reason, and we'll table it, and then you can go back to it because it will be categorized and there'll be some context around it. That's the thing, is that ideas can get categorized. You can be in a meeting and people are screaming things out. Oh, what about this and what about that? Well, maybe not now, maybe later. Either it gets lost because it's not really there, or it's buried in a lot of, notes, a lot of minutes from the meeting, but it's not in a way that is easily accessible. Oh, yeah, what meeting was it? Yeah, we have to go through that, and there's a lot of search. Whereas this is more of a direct. It's also, more visual and having a modality, the physical and the interaction. It's engaging, so it also will stick in your memory more. So that was my pitch for Edward de Bono. Like I said, that was Six Thinking Hats in particular because of my experience with it. I've also done the learning plan. I've done the weather forecast. I've done what do you call it? Predictive innovation. There's several others that I've looked through, and many more books that I've read about it. So this one is just, to me, among the easiest, and the one that's also reputed and that people have heard of, and would make it easier to say to them, hey, this is what I'm doing. Oh yeah, I heard about that, instead of speaking about something that no one has ever heard of, which causes a little bit of a pushback at times. So let's get to your innovation action. We're almost finished. We want to come together. Diversity is the key to solving the big problems. I talked about that pretty much at length earlier in this presentation, so we will move on. But I love that this graphic, this illustration of people from everywhere are the key. Remember that. Thank you. And I want to acknowledge my friend who has the hiking artist. He is the man behind the illustrations 5, 11, 13, 15 to 18, and 29. I appreciate his talents, and I appreciate the ability to use his graphics to hopefully make this presentation more appealing to you and more memorable. I hope you enjoyed this. Please feel free to reach out, write to me. You can connect with me at Lori@inspark.com, LORIINDSPARK.com. You can also, of course, reach me at theentrepreneurhotline.com. So you can contact me via Lori, LORI, at theentrepreneurhotline.com. So if you're forgetting it, you've been on the summit, you remember, you can reach me through the summit. And if you're interested in discussing innovation workshops, I have not only myself, but I have a network of people who work with innovation and who do innovation workshops and who sell innovation products and have, services and create experiences. So feel free to reach out. On that note, we are going to come out because I need to take a little bit of a break before getting ready for our next guest, who is Taryn Lee Kearney, who comes from South Africa, and she will be sharing with us the inevitable truths that entrepreneurs need to know. So I'm really excited about that. And that is me for now. See you.